I got to within about 15 feet of Andy, and I could see protruding from some rocks covering a body the foot of George Mallory.
The White Mountains of New Hampshire. The last time I roamed these beautiful and rugged peaks was in 2016 as I neared the finish of my 2,189-mile hike of the Appalachian Trail. Not only are the Whites home to Mount Washington, the highest peak in the northeastern U.S. and what is known as one of the most challenging sections of the Appalachian Trail, but they're also home to an individual who's become a controversial figure in the outdoor industry and a prominent figure in the story of Mount Everest, Thom Pollard.
World notoriety was also the mountain that claimed the life of
In 1999, a small expedition of climbers set out to search Mount Everest for the bodies of two British alpinists that had been lost on the mountain for 75 years. The two men that had mysteriously disappeared in 1924 were theorized to have actually been the first to summit Everest, nearly 29 years before Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay would famously reach the summit in 1953.
Oh, man.
Hey, man.
All right. Good to see you.
What's going on,
It's
bud?
been too long.
On May 1st, 1999, the team set out from base camp to begin the historical search for George Mallory and Sandy Irvine, unfortunately leaving behind team member Thom Pollard, a high-altitude cameraman, due to an oxygen tank malfunction. 45 minutes into the search, Conrad Anker broke off from the main route and came across a patch of white that didn't quite match the color of the snow. That white patch would become one of the most significant discoveries in all of mountaineering history, the body of George Mallory.
And forever.
How you
Great
doing?
seeing you. I'm awesome. So good to have you here. Welcome to our beautiful, cloudy New Hampshire. Back to the AT.
Good to be back here.
15 days later, a second search party consisting of Andy Politz and Thom Pollard would return to the site to photograph and search the body for essential artifacts and clues that could help solve the 75-year-old mystery, including a camera that could rewrite history, possibly proving that Mallory and Irvine were the first to reach the summit of Everest in 1924. What Thom would come away with that fateful day would begin a 20-plus year obsession and change his life forever.
All right, you ready?
Maybe. Yeah.
Let's do it.
How are you going to start this?
How am I
have
gonna start it? Well, I mean, I'm
no
gonna start like
freaking-
any other like corny interview
Well-
ever. So I like always to warm up, right? It's like,
Yeah.
who's Thom Pollard? Like, give me an introduction, man. Give me an introduction about you, where you're from, and
I've been thinking about this honestly for the last couple of months. And when I grew up in Western Massachusetts, kind of a interesting childhood. It was great. Like, I'm not going to go into the minutia of just whatever traumas we endured as a kid, but I was kind of a screw off. I was ADD-ish, if you will. Didn't enjoy school, but probably 12 or 13 years old. A buddy of mine said, "Hey, want to join the swim team?" And I'm thinking to myself, F no, I'm just a little kid, but damned if I just got really good. You know, I was immediately just like the best kid in the town. And then I, go through high school, get most valuable swimmer in the league. And then I get a full scholarship to Boston University for swimming, right? It was amazing. I mean, I loved it. But I was like, no, I'm just going to be a documentary dude. And I'm going to live in a big city. And,
wild.
yeah. So I was out of Boston University. I had a film degree. And all I wanted to do was like direct documentaries. And maybe I was really drawn to war. I'm going to go to a war zone. And I was fascinated with those cameramen who, like from Vietnam, who would just be embedded with troops, guns, and like that shit really turned me on. And shortly after that, though, my brother, this is probably back in the mid-1980s, so I was probably 25 or 26, my brother said, "Hey, Tommy, let's go ice climbing up in New Hampshire." So Jeff had 2 days. We came up here to North Conway, where we are now. And on our first day, we went up to Mount Willard, which is up at the top of Crawford Notch. And the guide goes up and he goes, okay, first guy. And that was me. And I remember like going up to the ice with my ice axes and kicking my crampons onto the ice and feeling some kind of transformation happen. That like I felt like this chill.
Yeah.
Really, just like this floating sensation. And
So then the ice climbing that was kind of your first introduction to mountains? Was
oh
ice
yeah,
climbing?
ice climbing was
What a
yeah.
wild way to jump into it.
Yeah. The next day, after that first day of ice climbing, I met this guy who was our guide that day, and he was one of the owners of International Mountain Climbing School, this guy, Mark Chauvin, who's still a good friend of mine today. And all we could talk about was like, if I was going to film an ice climbing documentary, this is how I do it. If I was going to film a rock climbing video. Now we're talking mid 1980s, like this shit, nobody was doing this back then.
Yeah.
Maybe Walter Bonatti or,
Yeah.
you know, or like taking pictures. Nobody was doing it. So I was obsessed. There was a combination of what really drew me to the mountains that was a bit about my past, because I had always wanted to, since I was in college, thought I would like to be a documentary filmmaker, operate in the nonfiction realm. That's what interested me. Even though before that I wanted to maybe make a motion picture in Hollywood or something. But the documentary genre just blew my mind because people put themselves in the line of fire, literally and figuratively. And then I get my crampons bite into the ice, and I thought, oh, this is really interesting. This is dangerous, and I'm out there on a limb, and wonder if I could do a film about that sense of putting yourself out there. Climbing, filmmaking, that was my portal. Oh, let's do a project here. And then I'd get to, so that was my gateway. That was my ticket, because I thought, I'll never be able to afford this. I mean, I could maybe someday, but I wanted to get paid to go do this stuff.
Right.
And that was all. I said, I'll never pay to go to Mount Everest. So far, so good.
Well, my first time going over there, I had no real, this sounds wacky now, being someone that just got back from my third time of being over there.
Yeah,
I didn't really have any super hardcore interest of being there, aside from like, we went to go do this bike tour of Great Britain, me and my buddy, and I convinced him to do that with me, which he's not a huge cyclist, but we went to go do that. And then the reverse of that was like, well, we're already going to be over there. It's not that bad to fly from like Scotland to Nepal. Let's go to Kathmandu. Let's go Everest Base Camp. And being a person that I read Into Thin Air by Krakauer back in high school, right? But didn't really connect with it. I wasn't really outdoorsy at that time. It was in bands. I was kind of a burnout. But I remember picking it up, digging it, and understanding it, reading it. But none of it ever stuck with me, right?
Mm-hmm.
No interest in Everest, no interest in any of that. And standing at base camp by myself for about 30 minutes, something kind of clicked, and like I felt, it felt really powerful there, really, really powerful. And then like for kind of a split second, I kind of understood why people had an obsession with the mountain and why they climbed the mountain. So coming down from Everest Base Camp, I had downloaded Into Thin Air, the audiobook, and I listened to it as we went back. And then all the way going back to the States, I started listening to it again. And it all like hit different, right? Because at that point, I'm hearing places, you know, when they stop in Namche and they stay at the Khumbu Lodge, which we stayed at in Namche. So like all that stuff like starts firing, and I'm just like, oh my God, I just experienced the same thing. And when I got back to the States, I kind of became a little obsessed with that region and climbing and all of that. And that's how I stumbled upon your stuff, because I started learning about the 96 disaster. And then that led to, you know, when Hillary and Tenzing climbed. And I can't even remember what I found, what I heard, but the name George Mallory, right? Like Mallory. And then it's like, oh, who's George Mallory? So I start diving into that. And that's kind of where you came in, where I start learning about the first film, Lost on Everest, which I could never find. I've seen so many clips from it, and understanding kind of who Mallory was, and you know what people speculated that he did, and the fact that he had been lost for what 75 years. And then I think I stumbled upon your stuff. So, you know, somebody that has been a massive outdoor geek. Like I love the outdoors and I love filmmaking, and like I've done some little projects here and there, but I am so fascinated with outdoor filmmaking and telling a story and adventure filmmaking and being in the elements. So I guess as someone that's just like totally like starry-eyed to all of that, like explain to me how that came about. So you went to Nepal and you were doing films on climbing, but then like fast forward, like you're on an expedition in 99 that led to a huge discovery.
Yeah.
Can you run me through one, how the hell did that even happen? Like how did you get put in that situation?
Yep.
And then kind of everything from there.
The way that Everest became part of the realm of my experience was somewhat organic, but I was endeavoring to drive that into my existence, if you will. I was ambitious for it. And so I would do a trip, say, to Denali, and I filmed it, and I would put these little mini documentaries together, and I called this one Storm Over Denali. And then I would make VHS cassettes of it, put a little label on it that I would print out, and you'd have these special labels that would fit right onto a VHS. And I'd send them to Discovery Channel, National Geographic, anybody that I could find a name. Here's Nat Geo, PBS, all these people. And I would send them all over, like to Britain at the BBC, and hoping that someone would see it and go, whoa, that's good, man. Let's get this guy on Mount Everest. And when I got my opportunity, I was working full-time in a video production company in 99 when I did get that call from PBS. It was a producer, this woman named Liesl Clark, an immensely talented woman who had just done 2 documentaries for Nova over the past previous seasons, working with David Brashears and Ed Viesturs on the IMAX film that made the Everest film. And so then the 99 expedition came up to look for Mallory and Irvin, and they're like, Pollard, you're up. And when I got that call, I had to go and ask permission from these guys that I was working for down in Hartford. And I said, hey, would you let me go on this trip? And in return, I'll give you all the money I make. And they said, no, either take it or leave it, man. Either quit or don't go. And I went home, talked to my wife at the time, and we decided, I was like, I'm quitting my job. And so I quit, just bought a house, 6 weeks in, 15-month-old child, went back to those guys the next day. I say, I quit. And I was on Everest like 2 months later.
Wow. And
then I was all in.
So after all this happens and you get into mountaineering and you get into filmmaking, you get this opportunity, take me to 1999 and climbing that mountain for the first time, like what that was like. Just physically, mentally.
Yeah, so the idea of me finally going to Mount Everest, which I dreamed of for some years, and from the day that Crampon Point hit the ice here in New Hampshire to getting to Mount Everest, I had obsessed about it. I had dreamed about what it might be like to stand on the summit of that mountain. And there was still a relatively pure element to Mount Everest. And we were on the north side. This is where Mallory and Irvin disappeared in 1924. Getting to the summit was much longer than I ever expected.
So you guys hit the summit and then...
No, summit didn't come till well after that. So on the discovery of Mallory, it was purely for the search. Okay. No summit, no intentions. It was just, we're up there to search. We'll come back down and we'll figure out the summit later. Because in 99, the discovery of George Mallory happened. On that day, as it would turn out, May 1st, 1999, I had an oxygen malfunction, essentially. There were 6 of us. I turned around and made the choice to not follow these guys. They're all on oxygen, thinking, oh, we'll never find anything. Like, there's no way. We'll just go back tomorrow. And so when I turned around that day, I just had never entered my mind that I should have kept crawling upwards just to be there for this historic day. We went back down, all the way back down to base camp after the discovery. And I'm thinking, I've just missed the greatest discovery in the history of adventure, or mountaineering, certainly. And was really upset, like thought, oh my gosh, I completely blew it. And 3 or 4 days later, it was on the cover of the New York Times, Time and Newsweek magazine, and I had missed it. And when we got back down to base camp, we had all these artifacts from Mallory's remains. And we had a base camp meeting, decided we're going to go back up. And that was my chance. We go back up to Camp 5, 26,000 feet, essentially. Huge storm comes in, 3 days. I run out of food. We're running out of oxygen, everything. I'm thinking, great. So I missed the discovery of Mallory. Now there's this huge storm. And I decided to forego my opportunity to climb to the summit, to go back to the site of George Mallory, to film more there and do a more exhaustive search with a metal detector.
When you went back to actually film and be there, can you tell me what it was like seeing
Oh, yeah.
George Mallory for the first time?
Summiting Mount Everest, it's way down here. I mean, it was amazing, don't get me wrong. I've got a lot of cool things. But the experience of being in the presence of George Mallory was it really one of the most powerful moments and days of my life. Not necessarily just because it was George Mallory, but because we were in the presence of a human being who had lost his life in pursuit of an incredible dream and a goal to do something that 99% of all living human beings thought could never be done. And he was a dreamer, and he was a passionate man with a lot of talent and ability, and it just happened to get him. He died doing it. So it was May 16th, and we woke up, our team of 6 woke up. Andy Politz and I were the chosen ones to go back to the site of Mallory with the metal detector, see if we could find the camera. We were looking for a camera that he was carrying. Maybe we could develop the film and see if there's any pictures from the summit. And we went up, dropped an oxygen bottle, a rope, up at Camp 6 for the rest of the guys who were going to leave for the summit very, very early the next morning. Like at 1 o'clock, I think they were going to leave. And then we descended down and swept across the north face, looking for any signs of Irvin, sweeping. And then we went down to about where Mallory was, and I could see protruding from some rocks covering the body, the foot of George Mallory. And I froze and became emotionally almost overwhelmed. I dropped down to my knees, not in prayer or reverence, but just in this sense of awe, one, in being in the presence of a human being who was exposed to the elements, who had died. He had 3 kids at home who now were in their 70s and never knew what happened to their dad. And I felt in that moment, if we don't do everything in our power, we're doing that man the greatest disservice that anybody could have ever done him. And so I stood up, I walked over, and we had to remove rocks. And what the first crew had not done that we were intending to do was, Andy and I wanted to get the metal detector under his body. And that was our aim, because they hadn't done that. His face was, nobody had seen his face or anything. So we gently extracted, not chipping with our ice axes or anything, but we were like, I think if we lift here, we move this, and we realized that we could actually lift him now. So I checked in his pocket, I found his watch, his wristwatch that had no crystal on it, still had the hour hand on it, amazing. I handed it to Andy, and then looking around, got kind of closer under his body, and then looked up and looked into his face. And I hadn't thought about it, but I was like, Andy, I'm looking in his face. And I felt this real respect, and not necessarily a kinship, but almost like he was my father or something. You know, we were the same age. When he died, he was 37. I was 37. He traveled around the world telling people about Mount Everest. You know, that idea of going after the pursuit of the impossible. And he devoted his life to it. He was on 3 Everest expeditions. He died for it. His children grew up and were adults and, never knew what happened to their dad. And then suddenly we're there. Nobody knew how he died. and Andy and I are there. After we leave, it's over. No one will ever return to this body again. It's over. We're not going to divulge the GPS coordinates. It's done. We have one chance to look for maybe more clues as to what happened to George Mallory. Unfortunately, Andy and I searched with the metal detector and looked everywhere, and we never found the camera. Put him back down, buried him, and left, and stayed that night at Camp 5, just below, not that far. And ever since, every day, dozen times a day, I think about it. I mean, it's been 25 plus years. Every single day, I think about George Mallory and Sandy Irvin and what they did and how much it changed so many lives of all the people that I was there with. And what incredibly, brave, if you will, maybe some people say stupid, but trying to do something that everybody thought was impossible. And so that represented something to me. Now, we still don't know if they made it or not, but it was certainly one of the most powerful days of my life, by far, I would say, right up there, seeing my sons born. That was it. It was right up there with that. Incredible.
So then, fast forward 2019, you guys returned.
Yeah, 2019, we returned. We decided through a couple of conversations I had had with an historian named Thom Pollard, who wrote the original book, The Mystery of Mallory and Irvin, who coined the phrase, that we were going to go back and look for Sandy based on some clues that Thom had. And we were back there, but this time it was not PBS, it wasn't BBC, it was our buddy Renan Ozturk, another North Face sponsored athlete, along with Mark, who had a pretty significant budget from National Geographic. And we went back up to look for Sandy based on these clues and based on conversations we had had with individuals who had purportedly seen Sandy Irvin in the years, not 99, but back in 75, 1960, the Chinese, a Sherpa in 1998, who had encountered a body well above where Mallory was, way up toward the ridge. Unfortunately, when we were getting ready to go up the mountain, I had a TIA, a trans-ischemic attack. The symptoms said, you might have had a minor stroke. And it took me a day, like an overnight and the following morning, to finally just decide that I'm not going to go up. So I had to leave the dream behind, if you will, and let the other guys take care of it.
Oh my God. That's the hardest thing in the world. Watching your blood brothers go onward.
But I had the greatest team ever assembled, in my opinion, and so I left the job to them, but we went and sought out this one specific location that we believed he had been, and he wasn't there. So we closed a chapter of the book a little bit, tied up a few bows to put the expedition, put the search for Mallory and Irvin essentially to rest. So does 2019 close the chapter? Or does it end the whole Everest thing for me? The answer is 99% yes. I have no intention to go back, but you never know. Never completely close the chapter.
We turn now to a discovery at Mount Everest, and Lara's here with the story from a National Geographic explorer. This is huge,
This
Lara.
could be huge.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Major clue in an enduring mountaineering mystery that may have emerged.
Climbers appear to have found his remains. Andrew Irvine, who went missing with the renowned explorer George Mallory.
National Geographic magazine reports a crew shooting a documentary found the remains, and they appear to belong to a man named Andrew Irvine.
This is certainly the biggest break in the mystery of Mallory and Irvin in at least 25 years. A boot and sock were discovered sticking out of the glacier. Never say never. But I just said never, so almost never say never. So yeah, I'm going back, you and me. All right, are you f***ing talking me into it and you haven't even said a thing?